All right, welcome to Sticks and Wires. This is a video about trying to reduce hi-hat bleed in your snare mic, sometimes called hi-hat spill. So what I've done here is I've gone through some very common things, some things that people suggest that I believe maybe are kind of myths, and some other things that actually have it work. So a lot of this video is some really critical listening, so please listen on with headphones or good speakers, because we are talking about, kind of minimal things while listening sometimes, and I'll point those out of what to listen for, but please listen on those things. The first and most important and best thing that you can do is control the volume of the player or of yourself. If we're wailing away on a hi-hat, it's going to be loud. It's going to go in a lot of mics. But if you balance yourself inside the kit, play the hi-hat not as loud, and of course this is for any cymbal, but this is going to help the reduction. Common sense, right? Common physics. The louder this is, this microphone's right here, it's going to get louder in there. Next is distance, the distance between the hi-hat and the snare. So this is never something that I've truly believed in too much for two reasons. One, you don't want to make the drummer uncomfortable, or if it's you don't want to be uncomfortable. Asking someone to move their hi-hat up to have it be farther away from the snare is going to alter their natural feeling of being comfortable with the drums. Possibly their style, how they play the hi-hat, the sound they're getting out of it. And secondly, I wanted to do a little experiment and see if it actually did reduce the volume if you moved it up a few inches. Another super obvious choice is the microphone that you're using and the pattern on the microphone. So I believe the most common microphone that you're going to see on a snare drum is a Shure 57. Pattern is cardioid, and not only does it pick up nice mid-ranges, but its mic pattern is not picking up all around here. It's really picking up what's directed at the microphone. So if you're pointing at the center of the snare or the edge of the snare, that's really where its main emphasis of what it's picking up. Right here I use a Beyerdynamic M201, which is another very common snare microphone. It has a cardioid pattern and a similar frequency to a 57, a little wider range on the low end there. But I wanted to give you kind of an extreme example. So what I did was put a 414 up in a figure 8 pattern. I've never seen a 414 on a snare drum, but I wanted to give you an example of what it sounds like if a microphone is not in cardioid. So it's in figure 8. So that means it's picking up what's happening here on the snare, but it's also picking up a lot of hi-hat. So we're getting a lot of that. So again, an extreme example, probably something you'll never see, but then hopefully your ears will understand the microphone pattern and the particular microphone that you're choosing. Okay, next. Sometimes you will see someone put some kind of barrier, padding, something here. So I wanted to try that. What I did is I took a piece of cardboard, put some tape on it, and then I put a little bit of this bandana, so just some cloth to soak up some of the sound, and I put it on the edge of the microphone. I do hear a very slight reduction in high end in this. It could be worth it in some circumstances to use this kind of technique. Again, it's pretty subtle. Anything you may be looking for, if there is maybe a louder drummer that you're recording, or if that's your natural thing, you're a heavy hitter. Maybe this is something that could help. Another test I wanted to try out was large versus small hi-hats. This is something that I have noticed in my recording and working in the studio. I love big hi-hats. 15-inch are kind of my go-to, and I love 16-inch hi-hats. But more and more, I'm finding that 14-inch hi-hats maybe are a little better for recording, and I'll say that subjectively, of course. But I feel like larger hi-hats, obviously they're going to ring more. They have more surface area. They're going to have a longer decay. Next, which is one thing that is very hard for me to replicate, small live room versus a small dry room. The drier the room is, you're going to have less bleed off the walls, less sound bouncing off the walls, and of course that's going to help because sound does, fly over here, bounce off the back wall, and come back. And if it's dry, if it's being absorbed by the dampening, or there's nothing coming off the floor, this is definitely going to help reduce the bleed. Again, we're talking about a small proximity of space here. So all these things are going to make incremental differences. Maybe if you have a dry room and some kind of barrier between these, all those little things are going to help if this is a problem for you. So let's check in with the tried and true way of kind of reducing hi-hat bleed in a snare, and that would be gating. This is a pretty great compressor. It's the Native Instruments Solid Dynamics. So let's hear real quick the snare top without any gating, and then I will turn it on. Okay, so it kind of speaks for itself. It really reduces the volume after the hit. Of course, your release time is important of how much of the snare ambience or ring you want to hear. You could really be drastic here. I'll give you a quick example of that. So you could utilize different things in that. Utilize the attack if you wanted. crank up the range. There's all kinds of things you can do that I'm not going to get into right here, but definitely reduces the hi-hat bleed. Okay, secondly, here's what we can do. We can trigger a sample. Let me give you this sample soloed. So obviously this is being triggered from what's been recorded, but you're just hearing the snare sound of the sample, nothing that was actually played in the room. Okay, simple enough. So there's the snare sample. So in the case of, you can use this two ways. You can blend the two. So what you would do is seriously reduce the amount of volume that you're hearing from the actual snare that you played, and you're going to be hearing much more sample. So here's an example of that. So here's an example of that. Okay, again, speaks for itself. That almost turns the snare top into kind of like a hi-hat mic itself, and that way you get the amount of hi-hat in there that you want. Plus, you get some of the acoustic snare, but you're mainly listening to the sample sound that you have. Another way to do this would be to literally just use the sample itself. I'll put some of the other drums in here. I'll put some other mics in here. So again, this is just, so let's do overheads, the two kick mics, the snare sample only, and the mono mic. Okay, so let me unmute the sample here. Okay, so I used this example on purpose of me playing the hi-hat very loud. Not something I really do, but I thought this would be the best example. So as you can hear, there's a lot of bleed in the overhead mics. Let me give you that real quick. Just soloed. So it's not bleed, is not what I mean. There's a lot of presence of the hi-hat just in these overhead mics. So again, this is, to go back to my first point here, the best thing that you can do is reduce your volume as a player on the hi-hat and or cymbals. That way it's not all over the place. Of course, a way to remedy this, so here's just the overheads and sample.